Well over 100 years ago, scientists concluded that light travel as a wave. And they knew that water waves were disturbances of water. Sound waves were a disturbance of air. So their assumption was light waves must disturb something. They called this something ether. So they went about spending countless hours doing very sophisticated research and spending a lot of resources trying to find this ether. There's a good article about this in Nova a few years ago by Kate Becker. It wasn't until Einstein published his theory of special relativity in 1905 that the solution became clear, according to Miss Becker. Ether wasn't just hard to find, it didn't exist. It was an incorrect assumption. So if we fast forward to the 90s and get into retirement mode, in the 90s, we were in the middle of the digital revolution, the new economy, and many very well-respected experts were suggesting, hey, in this new era of technology, it's reasonable to assume you're going to get 15 to 20% returns. So you should be invested in 100% in stocks. And if you're going to retire, just sell enough to cover your needs as you need it. And as long as you're taking out 8 to 10%, you should be fine. People made life decisions based on those assumptions. I know, I was there, I remember. And it worked out horribly. Now, if we fast forward to 2008, 2009, after the Great Recession, experts said that returns going forward are going to be horrible. Many people left investing forever, and they ended up missing a 10-year bear market, and that had a material impact, not just on their money, but on their life because of that incorrect assumption. So this month, on the Retirement Answer Man show, we are going to talk about our retirement assumptions so we can avoid making a disastrous mistake. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host, and this is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement. You make good assumptions, I think you can rock retirement. Really excited to hear. This is a bigger topic than it seems, these retirement assumptions. So what we're going to do this week is talk about our assumptions about how we're going to live. And then in the coming weeks, we're going to talk about the costs of retirement, assumptions about markets and inflation and so forth, so we can make sure we're being intelligent in our decision making. And make sure you sign up for 6 Shot Saturday. That's our weekly email. We may share some resources related to this topic, and you'll get those in that 6 Shot Saturday email. You can get that at rogerwhitney.com and just sign up there. But before we do anything, let's talk about this word assumption in our What's That Mean segment.
Huh?
What does that mean?
So let's talk about what assumption means. I mean, very basic. It's assuming that something is true. It's taking something for granted. And a lot of times in planning, all sorts of planning, there are a lot of assumptions that have to be baked into models in order to try to get the answers that we're looking for. I mean, if you think about it, you're standing where you're at today. Maybe you're 55 or 60, and you can make some assumptions of what tomorrow is going to look like and have some clarity there. But as you keep stepping out into the future, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next 10 years, the range of potential outcomes gets wider and wider and wider, sort of like a funnel. And in retirement planning, usually our models are going out 30 or 40 years because we want to make sure you have a great life today, but we want to make sure that, as one of my clients says, that we're able to eat blueberries when we're 85 or 90 and hopefully not do it on the side of the road. We want to make sure we don't run out of money. So when we're building models this far out, assumptions become critical in what those models tell us. You know, we make assumptions about inflation, about spending, about costs, about markets, about all our longevity and health and everything else, all sorts of assumptions. And we're forecasting out 30, 40 years. So this is really important. And you and your advisors make real life decisions based on these assumptions. Because I do that every day. Based on these assumptions and these models on all these different things, you're going to decide, I need to work 5 more years. Or I can retire today, or I need to take more investment risk, or I can't take my family on vacation this year. These are real life decisions based upon models that have a lot of assumptions in them. So we want to get those assumptions. I won't say right because you can't get them right, but we want to be pretty intelligent about it. You want to be thoughtful. You don't want to trust them too much, and you want to revisit them regularly. Alan Alda said this best. He said, begin challenging your assumptions. Your assumptions are the windows on the world. They're the window you're looking out. So you got to scrub them off every once in a while or the light won't come in. I think these are well said. So we're going to explore that because this is a critical thing to do, but we're not going to do that until right after this message. Getting answers to the questions, can I retire? How much can I spend? What will my life look like? Are critical questions that we all have. And that's one thing that we're building out in the Rock Retirement Club through Rock Retirement University. This month, we're releasing Module 5 in our Masterclass series, which is going to release the first spreadsheet to make assumptions about spending so you can start to determine how funded you are for your retirement. So I encourage you to go to rockretirementclub.com and check that out. And between the club and all the people that have walked this journey and Rock Retirement University, we may have the resources to help you find the answers you're looking for. With that, let's get to our main segment on assumptions. So the first step in this examination of our retirement assumptions, we're going to talk about life because that's the most important thing, right? And we're going to talk about some assumptions that we have to make in how we live, because what we use for assumptions obviously going to have a huge impact. And usually where we start when we're making an assumption of how we're going to live in retirement is in our spending rhythm. That's a major input. Well, how much do you need to spend every year when you retire? And in fact, that's the module that's coming out in the Rock Retirement Club this month. Module 5 is examining and creating those assumptions. Most of us will look at what we're at today, or we'll use a percentage of what we look at today, or we'll just swag it. We'll just wing it and say, I need $100,000. I need $200,000 a year. So we'll put that assumption into the calculator and then it will spit out its results. Well, let's look at that assumption for a moment. We've talked about this before in various ways. Let's say you need $100,000 today at age 55. When we make that assumption, what happens unintentionally is we're making that decision based on who we are today, by the current version of you. And if you think you need $100,000 or $200,000 today, you just extrapolate that out into the future. It seems pretty reasonable. We have a very difficult time as humans thinking of ourselves when we're 70 or when we're 80. No different than when we were kids. I remember looking at aunts and uncles and thinking they were like this alien thing. I didn't understand them. They were just different. I think we feel that way today, say at 55, when we look at someone at 75, we can't put ourselves in their shoes. So we just assume we'll spend like $100,000 or $200,000 a year for the rest of our life. And that's how calculators typically do it. So if you're 55 and you say you need $100,000, we put that into our calculator and most likely it has an inflation assumption. So that $100,000 25 years from now, if we assume 3% inflation, is really about $210,000 a year that you're going to spend. And we do this so often because we're inflating in the models the amount you're going to spend every year by a static rate of inflation. We'll get to that in another week. And that becomes our assumption of what we need to spend. Well, in most cases, in all cases, we don't spend that way. We don't have this compounding of a spending number that just happens every year. We typically have very lumpy spending. We have years where we're spending a lot, years we're spending a little bit, and most likely as we get older, we're slowing down. A lot of the travel and the other things are slowing down, and we end up settling to a much lower amount than we usually spend in early retirement. Not always, but mostly. We call these the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. But if we make the assumption I need $100,000 and it's going to adjust by inflation and it's going to be the same spending amount even when I'm 90 years old, that's going to demand a lot more from your plan than if you make more reasonable assumptions on early retirement being full of a lot more activities and then slowing down your normal spending rate. We're not talking about health shocks and things like that. Your normal spending rate as you get older, as you go to the park bench of life. That's an important assumption to make sure you get thoughtfully done. Because if you just use $100,000 increased by inflation forever, in this example, that may cause you to have to work a lot longer or save a lot more money or settle for less or take more investment risk. Those are big decisions, but I see it done every single day. And this is where I come into the safe withdrawal rate. We make assumptions about a safe withdrawal rate. Somehow that as long as we get that rate correct, we're going to be okay. But the problem is we don't spend in that way. We spend lumpy. We have clients that are taking 6 or 7% out a year, not forever, but for a season of life, because we've made other assumptions that all work in tandem. So that's a big assumption that we have to be careful about in our life. And we talk about that in the module that we're coming out in terms of how to build that. Another assumption that I think we don't think thoughtfully about, or we cannot think thoughtfully about, is not earning income. We talk about this as a light switch. I'm either working or I'm not working. And so the date that you retire, you never earn money again. For some people, that is totally true, and they're happy as clams. For most people, the studies show, people work in some level for a period of time in retirement. The second life concept that I want to make sure we look at and examine is that work is binary. You are either working or you are retired. That is a very common assumption in retirement planning, where we just enter the year that we're going to retire in the calculator. And in our generation, that's how work has sort of gone. We're not as used to the side gig and all these other things that the youngins are doing. And by having that light switch type of thinking, that basically takes away our human capital, our ability to earn an income in an instant. And that affects the planning that we do. Where what I have found in my practice over 20 years is that generally it's more of a dimmer switch. There's a lot of in between. Now, we have lots of people that just retire and they're never working again. There's nothing wrong with that. We just want to make sure we make an intelligent assumption about this. And it's very easy to presume, especially if you're, say, a corporate attorney or a senior level executive, where the demands on your time and travel and attention are so strong, and the culture doesn't necessarily lend itself to being in between. You're either all in or you're all out. Whereas doctors and nurses and some other professions have a culture where you can do some of that dimming down and gaining some of your time freedom. So what we end up doing is presuming I got to be all in or all out, and I can't get a job afterwards because nobody's going to hire a high-powered attorney part-time. And I'm used to making this level of income. Usually you're making the most income you've ever had in your life when you retire. And so it's just not worth it. I might as well not do anything. That's a presumption that may not be correct. And the reason is you're framing it in the sense that from the viewpoint of your current profession and from the current income level that you earn based on the product that you develop. And we think that, well, if I'm earning $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, it's not worth working if I don't earn that, because we're framed that way, because that's the kind of career we have, where I know very successful attorneys, corporate CEOs, and high-level professionals that leave the rat race and create careers for themselves, sometimes high-powered consulting careers, sometimes working from home and writing, sometimes even working at a Home Depot where they're earning $10,000, $20,000 a year. Now, you may say, well, what's the point of $10,000, $20,000 a year? It doesn't seem like much, especially if you have ample resources. But we've talked about pre-retirement before. That $10,000 to $20,000 a year could do a lot of things, obviously, personally, from a purpose standpoint and social standpoint. But it also helps in the entire planning. And by doing something like that, it may buy you something you actually care about. So I think we just need to challenge this assumption, because the impacts of this assumption, of a binary assumption, I'm working or I'm not working, could cause you to have to work longer. It could cause you to have to save more or take more risk or plan on spending less in retirement. Those are real costs. A good example is, let's say we got this high-powered attorney and they want to retire at 60, and then they're not going to have any income after that. If you do that plan, it may say, okay, well, we can do that, but you're going to have to save this much per year, and you may have to work to 61, and we're going to want to make sure we get investment returns. Whereas if the plan is, the assumption is, yeah, I'm quitting full-time work, but at some point I'm going to earn $15,000 a year for 5 years just writing for blogs or doing something, that could literally allow that person to retire a year earlier. And I'm not saying that that is an argument for doing the part-time work or the small incremental work relative to what your career was. All I'm saying is, if that is likely going to happen anyway, it may be wise to make a more intelligent assumption and factor something in there conservatively and make sure that you revisit it, because it can literally buy you things that you may care about more, like taking less investment risk. So that's the second one I wanted to talk about. The third one is the opposite, planning on being able to work. Many people have some kind of work as an essential part of their retirement plan, and their plan is dependent upon their ability to work in retirement. So we're flipping this around. That may be a reasonable assumption, but it's going to be one that we want to monitor, because let's think about this. And I had Mark Miller from Career Pivot point this out when we did a series on pre-retirement. Let's say I'm going to go work at Trader Joe's or one of the grocery store chains that provide health insurance. I forget which one it was. Well, that may be a great plan, right? It helps give you corporate health care and it helps you earn a little bit of income. But what if you can't stand all day or walk around? Standing at a cash register or walking all day long on hard floors could be very taxing on your body. What if you're thinking you're going to do this side hustle and start a blog or something else? Maybe technology and attitude. Maybe you just don't want to go down that route anymore and learn those new things. Mentally, maybe you go work part-time at Starbucks, but attitude-wise, I don't want to put up with all these young people. I'm 65 years old. I'm not going to let that guy at the drive-thru yell at me. I'm just not going to take it. It's not worth it. So we can conceptually make these assumptions. I'll go work at Starbucks. I'll go work at Trader Joe's and I'll get health insurance and I can be active and earn a little bit of money. But you get there and you're like, oh man, my legs hurt. I can't do this every day. Or I'm not putting up with these people. Or just quite literally, life happens and you can't work. So it's okay to make an assumption thinking that work is going to be essential to your retirement, but I'd be careful with that assumption because life might throw you a curveball. So we want to make sure you revisit that annually. The next one in a life category, let's talk about the kids. A recent Bankrate survey found that 50% of Americans say they have sacrificed or are sacrificing their own retirement savings in order to help their adult children financially. And I've seen this in play. And I do it in some form personally. I have a 23, 24-year-old. And there's that line in between helping them launch and accelerating their development and growth in the world and enabling. But many people are helping their children financially, either on a consistent basis or a la carte. When I need money for this, I got myself in a jam. My business is going down. I can't pay the landlord. I'm behind on my mortgage. I see this all the time. I see it in healthy ways where parents are helping launch their children and putting kerosene on a rocket that's already moving in a great direction. But I see it very often in a bad way, in an enabling way, where they're continually making bad decisions. And oftentimes the adult child is married, they have a wife, they have children. So now you have your grandbabies at risk, or quote unquote at risk, that pulls that emotional string that is attached to the purse string even harder. So we're going to need to make an assumption on this. The assumption default is not helping the kids. You're never going to have to. And this is one that has to be monitored, because if you start to help the kids on a consistent basis, as 50% of Americans do, evidently, that can have a material impact on the plan. And this is one of those things where it just sort of happens on the side. You know, you shuffle a little bit of money over here, you shuffle a little bit of money over there, and you don't really account for it in the budget. And it's only through the perspective of after the fact, at least on my end, where I say, oh, yeah, I had to do that because Johnny needed to pay his car payment 5 months in a row. So that shouldn't happen again. So we got to be careful with that assumption. The next assumption, the biggie. And in fact, we did a whole month-long series on this last year, longevity. And longevity is a weird thing, right? Let's say you're 60. We're going to take a 60-year-old, male and female. Each year you live, your longevity increases a little bit, which is weird. But the idea is you lived one more year, so that risk is gone. And so if we take a male, if we just use simple longevity charts, and I say simple, that's probably a poor word. According to the American Academy of Actuaries, this is the life insurance companies you use. If you're a 60-year-old non-smoking male in good health, you're expected to live to the age of 84. So do you plan for 84? I'd be careful with that, depending on your specific situation. Statistics like that can be very deceiving. In fact, we're going to do a mini series in the future about being careful with statistics. It's very easy to get fooled by statistics. So I don't know if I would assume that you're going to live to 84 in a life expectancy table. If you are a 60-year-old male, non-smoker, you have a 50% chance of living to 87, which really says you also have a 50% chance of living beyond 87. Depends on how you interpret that. And if you're a female, age 60, you have a 50% chance of living to 89 or or to say another way, beyond 89. So we got to be careful in how we think about our longevity. And we also have to remember that these life expectancy statistics take into account the entire population, rich, poor, healthy, unhealthy, good habits, bad genes, good genes, and on and on. Your health is not average. I don't know where it is. I don't know where mine is. I would hope if I looked at myself, I think my health is probably fairly above average. I exercise. I don't drink too much wine. I don't take too many medications. I'm in a happy marriage. I have access to health care. I check a lot of the boxes of things that I should be doing. I'm not the poster child, but I get close. And I'm grouped in when it comes to longevity with everybody else. I don't know where you are, but you're going to want to make some reasonable assumptions on the planning age that you use for your longevity. So let's take a female. Now I'm using a calculator that's a little bit more robust in segmenting you based on your health, not the general population. So let's take a 60-year-old female, and I'm using this John Hancock insurance calculator. So I'm going to put in, I'm a 60-year-old female. I am a non-smoker. Let's see, how tall am I as a female? I'm going to say 5'6". Now this is a big one. I have no idea what a 5'6" female weighs at age 60. I'm going to say that I weigh 137 pounds. I don't know where that is. And I don't have high blood pressure. My blood pressure is normal. My cholesterol is normal. I exercise, let's see here, daily, weekly, monthly. I don't. I'm going to say daily. How much alcohol do I drink? I drink 3 to 4 times a week. How many driving violations have I had in the past 5 years? I'm going to say none. According to that, and this is a life insurance company, my projected life expectancy is 94. Big difference between mid-80s. And again, that doesn't mean I'm going to live to 94. There's a good chance I live beyond 94. Each year I get older and another year of risk of cancer and accidents and so forth go away. That could slowly creep up. I think in the book, The 100-Year Life, the statistic I saw there was if you're 60-year-old, you have a 50-50 chance of living over 90. So we got to be careful with this life expectancy stuff. Now, in my planning, I believe I use early 90s, 92 for male, 93 or 4 for female. And we test for living even longer. So we got to be careful with this assumption. And it's something we need to monitor. Now, let's go to the flip end, the other side. I just recently had someone who passed away. That was a client. He was healthy in every way, except he had had quadruple heart surgery and had some crazy stuff with his valves. And he was very in tune with his doctor on what his true life expectancy might be. And it would have been a miracle if he lived past 85. He passed away at 83, but we planned and he planned to hit that 85 mark. And most likely that would be a blessing if he did. And that allowed him to be able to spend and do more in terms of experiences with family, giving to family, doing things for himself and so forth, because he knew he didn't have a normal life expectancy. And so it allowed him to use his resources to create more life in the time that he had. Now you can imagine on my end, it was like trying to land a plane on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the night in a storm. I didn't want to undershoot. What happened if he lived to a 90, 95? So that was always my stress. And so he and I had a push and pull as we were navigating this. And unfortunately, he died earlier this year in his early 80s. But that's a really important assumption we need to think about. The next assumption that we want to think about in our life is our mental capacity. Naturally, as we get older, our mental capacity slows. We've had conversations about this on the show in the past. There are a lot of things that we can proactively do to mitigate this risk and stay intellectually healthy, but there are some things that just happen. Our mental capacity diminishes. We become slower. I see it in my in-laws. I see it in clients, but we're making assumptions in whatever systems we're setting up that we're going to have the same interest and quickness and intellectual curiosity that we have now when we're 85. And so this assumption means that we're not planning for the time that we're really, really on the park bench and have no interest or capability of managing our withdrawal strategies or allocation and all of this complexity. we may want to at least keep in the back of our mind that at some point in the future, we'll want to put in systems in place that will help put us on autopilot a little bit more. Now, when we recognize this assumption, a lot of times we want to act on it. Doesn't mean we have to put those things in place right now necessarily, but they should be on the radar at some point in the future to evaluate. That could be when you're 70, it could be when you're 80. The key is we want to be careful with that assumption. The last assumption I want to talk about in the life category for this week, and next week we're going to talk about retirement costs, is that use assets will be held forever. This is a big one that I see that people make in their planning, and it can be, again, has a real impact. It may cause you to work longer. It may cause you to spend less money. It may cause you to take more risk. So we built these assets, whether it's your house or your lake house or your big RV or other things, and we're assuming that we will hold these things forever. A good example, and I think I used it in my book, was a client who had a ranch, and their assumption was they would live in this ranch forever. They were horse people. They enjoyed the community. They enjoyed everything about that kind of lifestyle. And maybe you have a golf one. Maybe you have a boating one or an airplane one. And the spouse had died. And so this ranch that they had lived on for a long period of time had even taken on more meaning for them because it was a holder, a reminder of all the memories that the two of them had had. And in planning, when we ran the scenario of living on this ranch with all the upkeep that needed to be done, there are going to be some big sacrifices in order to make that happen. And so what we did was we identified, okay, we know how important this is to this person. How do we make a better assumption of how this will play out so they can get what they want, but not have to sacrifice too much? And the solution was, and this was a collaborative process, not just us dictating, obviously, was, well, if we do this, that, and the other thing, let's plan on living in the ranch for 7 years and then taking that use asset and turning it into a productive asset, selling the ranch, downsizing, moving closer into the city, and purchasing the place in the city for cash, but taking the rest of the equity and making it productive in terms of being able to provide income and growth. And then by making that more reasoned assumption, it gave them more time in the ranch because the initial analysis was, you can't do this. And so the initial response, as you might expect, was, okay, I guess I got to sell it. We're like, well, wait, no, not so fast. If this is that important, let's figure out how you can do this for a season. And in fact, with this person, it ended up being a longer season because as we evaluated it, and this was in the last 10 years, because of how the world unfolded, they were able to extend their time in this special place for them before they moved into the city. So we want to be careful about it, that assumption, because a lot of times we'll have a lot of financial capital, worth, money tied up in an asset that doesn't produce anything other than the enjoyment of our use. And our assumption is that we'll have that forever. And that's not normally the case. So that wraps up our challenging of retirement assumptions for life. Next week, we go into cost. But for now, let's go chat with Nicole and answer some of your questions. So here we are in the question and answer session with one of our favorite people, Nicole Rockstar Mills. Nicole, how are you?
I'm hanging in.
Are you getting excited because school is almost out and summer vacation will come and the kids will be home?
Well, I mean, they're still home, but I am excited that the random slide decks of assignments will stop coming and then we can get back to doing fun things and learning what we feel like learning and that kind of stuff.
So is that a very happy way of saying, am I saying I am so frustrated with all these homework assignments the kids have to do at home because they complain about them all the time? Is that a nice way of saying that?
Yeah, I think that's a nice way of saying it. I know everybody's doing their best right now, but it's
getting hard.
Still kind of a drag.
Well, I created a short little ditty just for you.
Did you?
Yes. You ready? I'll be real quick. Oh May, please make the COVID go away.
Oh, that is quite lovely.
It's a work in progress. So while I work on, I need some finger snap. Anyway, we have some questions from awesome listeners, and why don't we get to those?
Our first question is from John on super backdoor Roths. And he writes in, are there any hidden issues with doing an in-service rollout of my after-tax 401k contributions and the gains into a Roth and traditional IRA respectively, then rolling the traditional IRA back to the 401k in the same tax year? I'm trying to avoid the pro rata rule that could affect my other backdoor contributions.
I need a flow chart for this. I think everyone.
That's complicated.
It seems more complicated than it really is. So John made after-tax contributions to a 401k. So these are contributions that are taxed as income, but they can grow tax deferred. And so what ends up happening when you have these types of contributions is you have the monies that you contributed that you already pay tax on, but the IRS looks at any growth on that money as pre-tax. So you have after-tax and pre-tax. So what John is trying to do is, it sounds like his plan will allow partial rollout of his 401k. Some plans will allow that. And then you can identify the single source. So he wants to take his after-tax contributions, move those to a Roth IRA because they've already had taxes paid on it. But then he has all the gains that have to come with it where he hasn't paid taxes on. So he wants to try to move it all out and then move the gains back into the 401k because he's trying to avoid something called the pro rata rule. So the pro rata rule is when you do a conversion of an IRA to a Roth, and if it's an after-tax contribution, that's really what a backdoor Roth is. Usually we'll do that in one account where we're just using an IRA to make that transition from contributing after tax to moving it to a Roth. But when the IRS looks at it, it doesn't just look at the IRA that you're using to do that. If you have other IRAs, all it sees is the total of all the IRAs that you have. It doesn't see just the one that you're trying to do it. So for example, let's say you have a $10,000 non-deductible traditional IRA, and then you have a $10,000 deductible SEP. So you have 10,000 pre-tax, 10,000 after-tax contributions. If you tried to roll over those non-deductible contributions, the 10,000 of the 20,000 total, the IRS is going to say, no, we got to put it all together. So you don't just get to roll over the non-deductible. It's going to be pro rata based on all of the IRA assets. So really only 5,000 of the 10,000 you converted to a Roth would actually be non-deductible. Hey, it's time for that all-important disclaimer. We so appreciate you listening to the show and love your questions and love the teaching that we're able to provide here. And actually, it helps us too. But remember, you're not our clients.
Not love it if you took advice from us on the show.
We would not love it if you took advice from us on the show. Realize it's helpful, it's an education. Talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor before you make any decisions.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.